All right, welcome back to the program. My guest is joining me right now, Kelvin Emmanuel, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Dairy Hills Limited. Hello, Kelvin, and welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Good
Thanks for having
morning.
me.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Now, let's get started. Let me start with this question. The executive orders that President Tinubu signed yesterday, does it reverse what President Buhari had done in the twilight of his administration? For example, the 5% tax was also suspended that was canvassed by the former Minister of Digital Economy, Issa Pantami.
Yes.
So does it really reverse? How does this really play out?
So, an executive order is basically like the temporal powers that the president has to suspend legislation that has been passed by approved by National Assembly in the Finance Act. And to be honest with you, what he's done is like, people are saying you've removed petrol subsidy, which was the right thing to do. You've unified the exchange rate, which has made it more expensive to get the USD. And there's only one official rate right now because the spot markets has aligned with the I&E window. Cost of living has gone up. There is a 7.5% VAT on imported diesel, which increases the diesel prices by another 45 to 50 naira per liter. Why would you allow the Finance Act to go into play? So what he has done basically is pending when the National Assembly will meet to amend the Finance Act. The incoming finance minister will probably send an amendment of the Finance Act to the National Assembly to amend. It's created a 90-day window to freeze the implementation of that Finance Act that was going to add a 40% duty on certain vehicles and imported cars that had 2,000 cc and above, 5% on telecom, green tax on plastics that are made from polypropylene crystals, and so it creates a relief temporarily. That's what it does.
That's what, of course, not total elimination, not an elimination. Would you say that perhaps this is one of, I will call it like a palliative too? Would this be considered a palliative?
It is.
Yes, a palliative in the sense that Nigerians are really suffering right now
Yes.
from what you said, PMS subsidy removal and some other policies announcement by Mr. President. So is this the first step of Mr. President saying, I hear your cry, okay, take this first?
Yes.
As to businesses
Yes.
and also individuals, because, okay, yeah, answer that.
As a matter of fact, I think Nigerians was also expecting him to announce that they're suspending the 7.5% duty VAT on diesel, imported diesel. Look, there are 41 different taxes and levies that telecom companies in Nigeria pay. In fact, the International Telecom Union reports that Nigeria has one of the highest corporate income tax rates in the world. Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense for you to look at this, and this is why tax experts have also called for the harmonization of taxes in Nigeria to avoid all kinds of taxes here and there, and when you look at it, the ease of doing business makes Nigeria rank at below 140 on the global ease of doing business scale around the world. So this makes a lot of sense. It's kind of palliative, but it's not enough because, the cost of living has really gone up. I'm expecting that food inflation is going to continue up because of the increase in the prices of petrol. I'm also expecting that core inflation is going to continue up. And because the Monetary Policy Committee at the Central Bank, the MPRO tracks inflation by 400 basis points of 4%, any corresponding increase in inflation is going to result in an increase in the MPR rates. And even if you increase the MPR rates, the prime lending rate goes up, the commercial lending rate also goes up. And it's going to affect not just the risk of the non-performing loan ratio of the commercial banks on their balance sheet. Some banks are reporting over 6%, some are reporting over 7%. The approved CBN rates band for bank examiners is between 4.8 and 5.6 for non-performing loan ratio. It's also going to affect businesses that borrow because the commercial lending rate is anywhere between 28 and 30%. So for me, it's important to look at this from a holistic point of view and see how all of them connect. You raise these things, inflation continues to go up. The MPR has to revise the monetary policy rate up, and you see that impact go into the financial markets and how it affects everything else.
For the 5% that has been suspended on telecoms tax, we also know that I think there's a 5% excise duty that's not also on only on telecoms, but on other sectors. When I looked at it, I said, perhaps when it also starts, isn't it a backdoor way of increasing VAT or of increasing the taxes on perhaps consumption and all of that to 12.5%? I hope you understand what I'm saying. Because VAT is 7.5%.
Yes, more like levies, actually.
Yeah, but whatever it is, you are paying.
Yes, and this also brings to bear the issue of the sugar consumption tax that was introduced in the 2021 Finance Act that was billing 10 naira per litre or 40 million litres of sugary drinks that are consumed in Nigeria yearly. Look, Nigeria has 12 million diabetes patients and 5.7% of Nigeria population are diabetic. So when you put a consumption tax on sugar, for example, in the US, they put a the consumption tax on sugar, and they recorded a 26.7% decrease in consumption of sugary drinks. What exactly are you doing by putting a consumption levy on sugar? What do you do with the money? There is a 30% levy on imported raw industrial sugar into Nigeria. What is the government doing with the 30% that they get as levy for importing sugar? There's a 15% levy on importing wheat into Nigeria. What are you doing with the levy that you're collecting for importing wheat into Nigeria that is making bread prices more expensive? Because the more the levies the importers of wheat pay, it adds to their distance. Are you not supposed to use that money to develop the growing of wheat into Nigeria, backward integration to reduce how much of wheat that is imported into Nigeria, about $5 billion worth every year? Are you not supposed to develop the sugar this thing in Nigeria? Are you asking companies who produce sugary drinks to migrate from normal sugar they use to maybe sorbitol, which is like a tertiary derivative of processing industrial starch into sweeteners in place of normal sugar that is more healthy, by the way? So what is the aim? What is the target? For me, when you talk about these taxes and levies, especially the levies, it's not just about you raising it as a way to raise more revenue for the government. It's the purpose of it. Usually, governments introduce levy to either deter the increased imports into the economy because they want to develop comparative advantage with it, or they impose that levy as what they call a backward integration program levy to develop their own local production. So for me, what is the end game? Are you raising the levy because you want to raise revenue for government to fund its budget, or you're raising the levy because you want to target it at strategic areas in the economy?
Now, with what the president has done, perhaps deferring the commencement of these dates as to the effectiveness of when these taxes come into play, where does it really leave the government in terms of balancing their budgets, as it were, in terms of getting revenue? Let me put it that way, because this is a government that is really challenged with revenue generation. Now you're saying, guys, just hold on. We're giving you, in some cases, 3 months, in some cases more than that, for this to come into effect. We're giving you this as a palliative too, because we know that we've put in some policies that are hurting you right now. But how does the government, federal government especially, balance that act of generating more revenue?
Well, okay, I'll tell you how it balances out. For example, for the 6 months from July to December 2023, the fact that they deregulated PMS and the government does not have to do under recovery is going to save them 30.6 trillion naira, and that effectively is going to reduce what they have to borrow to fund the 2023 budget by somewhere around 40 or 45%. And the fact that the exchange rate has actually been unified is also going to increase the revenue that NNPC remits to the Federal Account Allocation Committee, Federation Account at the CBN.
Will we see NNPC remitting now? Because NNPC has not remitted in like over 2 years or 3.
Yes, and this is
so
because
with this
NNPC,
now, will it be remitted?
Because
NNPC said that the federal government is owing it about 2.8 trillion naira. So earlier this year.
Well, this is why NNPC, the management, has to sit down with FAC, has to sit down with representatives of the presidency to reconcile accounts. In my opinion, I say, look, do an audit, do an external audit.
Audit of what?
Do an audit of the DSDP, Direct Sale, Direct Purchase Program, that was administering over the crude oil swap since 2015 16 to date. Do an audit so that it will help you to in that reconciliation of account process.
But of course, they said they will stop crude oil swap.
And the fact that NNPC is saying the government is owing it 2.8 trillion is the more reason why it has to conduct an audit, an external audit to know the true position of things. So, for example, this unification means that the government gets 39% increment in the revenue it collects from crude oil receipts. So, in my opinion, I will tell you that I expect that from now till December, the government will save somewhere anything around maybe 5 trillion naira.
From a budget that is already deficit. Where would that money come? You understand what I'm saying?
The president needs to send a supplementary
save
budget.
From where? From borrowing exactly?
From removal of PMS subsidy.
Because you don't even have the money now.
No, removal of PMS subsidy that
anyway,
they would have borrowed to pay.
PMS subsidy though, but you know, the PMS subsidy, the funds were actually borrowed.
The funds were borrowed.
Yes.
That means you stop borrowing.
Yes. So that borrowing now, will it now be channeled to doing some other things around health or human capital needs?
This is
you understand what I'm saying?
The reason why.
Because there's no 3.9 trillion naira cash now that the government is seeing.
No.
July
when I say save, what I'm
yeah.
saying is that the government does not have to borrow.
To borrow.
Right?
The government does not have to borrow.
The government does not have to borrow. The government was borrowing to fund the deficit in its budget. The government,
because it doesn't have enough money.
It doesn't have enough money to fund it. In 2023 Appropriation Act, the government scheduled to borrow 7.5 trillion. And both the multilateral banks, the bilateral partners, they were not willing to borrow. They were not willing to give Nigeria money. China rejected Nigeria's request to borrow in the 5-year rolling plan of the medium-term expenditure framework. Okay? Nigeria could not raise a Eurobond because Nigeria's credit sovereign rating is junk, CA1. I'm expecting at the next review meeting by Moody's and Fitch that they will actually revise Nigeria's sovereign rating up from probably CA1 to somewhere around B3 for its usual default rating. Okay,
just as because I'm also looking at our time, if we take a look at what has been done now by the president, the EOs, that's the executive orders that have been assigned, you've talked about, okay, you've not talked about that. What will likely be the impact on prices of goods and services? That's one, because earlier on during my intro, I did say prices may not go down, but they won't go up. And the law of gravity doesn't apply in this country when it comes to prices. Then what do you think about the green tax too? I know you brushed on it earlier, so I would like you to talk about that a bit before we go.
Well, you know, on the issue of green tax, you know, the climate activists are saying that plastics, you know, they constitute a nuisance to the global ecosystem, environmental ecosystem. For me, I think it was the right thing that the president is suspending 10% green tax. I also do not think that it's going to have this executive order is going to have so much material impact in reducing the cost of living. It just means that the cost of living will not go up exponentially in this month of July, you know.
Till when does it come into effect?
I believe that before the end of the 90 days, the new finance minister, whoever the finance minister is going to be, will do the needful of working with National Assembly to probably amend the Finance Act. I honestly believe that the president needs to amend the 2023 Appropriation Act, send a supplementary bill to the National Assembly, because the supplementary bill that the immediate past president passed does not reflect in any way his policy direction or fiscal strategy that he has implemented in the last 40 days so far. It doesn't reflect it. It's like a complete diversion and opposites of. So for me, I'm like, how are you implementing a budget that is like an opposite of what you're currently doing in your fiscal strategy paper? You need to send a supplementary bill and budget to the National Assembly.
In that Finance Act, perhaps what we are saying that we may see some kind of revision if the president goes ahead with it. What other things do you want the presidency, Tinubu's presidency, to be sensitive to? I think this Finance Act, the last administration should be commended for that, because they were the ones that started. Oh, did Okonjo-Iweala do that? I can't remember. But I know that during Buhari's time, when you have a budget, you have a Finance Act that will, accompany. And I think they started in 2019, and that was done for 2020 with all the COVID measures and all of that. So what other areas do you think that this presidency should be sensitive to in terms of additions to the Finance Act that will ameliorate suffering, economic suffering on individuals as well as businesses. We do know also that I think in 20, yeah, I think it was done in 2020 and the 2021 Finance Act where businesses within a certain threshold, if you earn less than 25 million naira yearly, you pay less, or you don't even pay anything at all, company income tax and all of that. Should we begin to see things like that and even more?
In fact, in the partnership, the VAT Direct initiative that they've set up with the Market Traders Association of Nigeria, companies that do not do up to 25 million are exempted from it. But for me, I tell you that since President Tinubu is being radical with his change and his direction away from the past 3 or 4 presidents, I want him to go all 9 yards and actually go to the meat of the issue. What's the meat of the issue? Nigeria has a fundamental problem with structure and fiscal federalism. And this fundamental problem is the fact that states are supposed to collect VAT and personal income tax, and that the principles of derivation, where the federal government gets 55%, states gets 29%, local governments gets 16%, it's not working. It's a tough argument. It's not an easy conversation to have. If the governors go to National Economic Council meeting with the vice president as the chairman, the CBN governor, and the minister of finance in attendance, it's not an easy conversation to have. But if Nigeria must make progress, and the states are going to, because some states own 190 billion, some states 290, some states 400 billion. Lagos is doing a 10 series state government bond of 1 trillion naira. The fiscal position, states together, they have 13% of the total debt stock of 77 trillion naira we currently have. How do you improve the fiscal position of the state? Change the principles of derivation that establishes the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Allocation Commission from population, equity of states, landmass, IGR and derivation. Change it to only 2, IGR and derivation. This thing where governors use population as a tool to collect allocation from the federal government, it's not working. Anyway. This thing where you collect VAT in Lagos, or you collect VAT in Rivers, or you collect VAT in Oyo State, and you now distribute along the whole state, it's not working.
That was what Governor Wike and I think Governor of Lagos, I think, yes, fought in 2021.
So you have to change the principles of derivation so that the states can go back to putting on their thinking cap, amend the legislative list, move some, there are still items on the legislative list that needs to be moved from exclusive to concurrent lists.
Emmanuel, you want to get me started on another topic. You know, but I know that RAMFAC is working on something in terms of, I think it was even the last administration that
increased the allocation of states. It's still not enough.
Okay, that's a discussion for another day. But just in 30 seconds, what President Tinubu did yesterday, is there an indication of a departure of the usual Tinubu that we used to know, the Tinubu of Lagos those days that everyone knows as a tax man? Because people were like, okay, if he enters, he's going to tax the whole of us, and Nigerians will really be taxed out. What he did yesterday, is it a bit of a departure?
I think he's getting perspective as he goes along, and he's realizing that Lagos is not Nigeria.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Kelvin.
Thank you.
We'll look at that other topic, which you want to get me out of my den, but I'm not coming out today. We're talking about the EOs, the executive orders. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.